Hey guys, welcome to Knifewear Cooks. Today I'm going to talk about how to properly French baste a steak using a cast iron pan. So French basting is an awesome technique for cooking pretty much any tender cut of steak. It basically involves getting a cast iron pan really nice and hot with a bit of oil in there, searing off one of the sides so it's nice and crispy and brown, flipping it over, and then tossing some butter, some garlic, some herbs into your pan, and spooning that whole mixture over the surface, and letting it cook up kind of slowly to a medium rare. There are some key points to sort of take a look at before we get going here. First of all, the cut of steak that you like to use. I really like using something like this. This is a ribeye steak. Ribeye is a really delicious cut. It's got a great deal of flavor. You can see a lot of marbling and fat in this guy. I like it a lot because it tastes great, but it's also got a lot of surface area. And surface area is really important when you're doing this kind of cooking, because that means that you're going to get a lot more of that caramelization and color on there, which is really the reason that we're doing this. It's a nice tender sort of mouthfeel on this guy. I like to do tenderloin and top sirloin and stuff like this too, but I really feel like I can take better advantage of the surface area with this guy. I have some fresh garlic that we're going to coarsely chop up. I have some fresh thyme that we're going to sort of just leave whole and get in the pan and develop a little bit of flavor. And I'm using kosher salt. So kosher salt, I think, is probably one of the best types of salt for this type of cooking. You can use, coarser sea salt and fancy salts like truffle or smoked salt and that kind of thing. But I like to go nice and simple. I like to sort of let that meat speak for itself. So the first thing that we want to do is we get our steak and we pull it out of the fridge. Getting that chill out of there is extremely important. It's going to give you a much more even cook overall. You're not going to get that big sort of threatening purple line in the middle. It's going to be a nice sort of pinkish red through and through if you cook it from room temperature. So while we're waiting for our steak to come up to room temperature, let's get the rest of our ingredients all set and ready to go. There's not a whole lot of ingredients that you have to worry about when you're French basting a steak like this. Buy a nice quality cut of meat. I got some cloves of garlic here that I'm going to chop up quite coarsely, and I have some fresh herbs, some thyme. So I don't want anything to cook too fast, so I'm going to keep it all fairly large. I don't like to have little teeny tiny pieces that are going to burn up on my pan. So when I take my garlic here, I'm going to use 3 cloves because garlic is life and it's delicious. I'm going to cut them up fairly thick. So you don't want to have little teeny tiny pieces. You want to have nice big fat pieces like this. They're going to cook in that oil, they're going to cook in that butter, and they're going to release their flavor quite nicely. We're going to sort of spoon them over top of the steak, and it's going to smell and taste really, really good. So let's get these guys coarsely chopped up. I'm just going to give it a quick once over here. Nice big chunks like that's going to do perfectly. For my herbs, you can use thyme, you can use rosemary. Thyme, I think, is pretty much essential for this kind of cooking. I just like to pull it all apart from the stem. I don't need to chop it up because it's not actually going to be served with the meat. It's just going to mix up with that butter and give us a really nice flavor. I've got a little bit of butter on hand. You're going to want probably about a tablespoon and a half, and it's going to melt into that pan. You're going to spoon it over really easily. And then we just got some kosher salt. This is all of the mise en place that we need to get ready for what we're cooking here. We just need to wait for our steak to come up to temperature. In the meantime, we can start to get our pan prepped and ready to go. So when you're using a very thick pan like this, it's important to let it have some time to start to get nice and warm for you. You don't want to be throwing food into a cold pan. You want to make sure that it's really nice and hot and ready to go, because that way stuff is going to stick in there a little bit less. It's also going to help your steak cook a little bit better over high heat. If you start with a cold pan and then turn it on, you're going to end up sort of messing up one of the sides and you're going to have an uneven cook. I'm going to grab some sunflower oil or canola oil, something kind of neutral, and I'm going to put a pretty generous amount into the pan here. What you're looking for is an oil that is not going to burn easily. You're also looking for an oil that's not going to add a lot of strange flavor to it. I think that sunflower, canola, lard, those all work really, really well. So now we got to be patient, let our pan get nice and hot. So I'm beginning to feel a lot of heat come off of this pan. It's starting to feel really nice and hot. So it's almost time for us to steer our steak. First things first though, I want to get a little bit of seasoning on this guy. One thing that a lot of home cooks don't do is season their meat well enough. You want to use a little bit more salt than you think you need to, especially for something like steak. I'm going to very gently now, with my tongs, I'm going to lower this guy into my pan. Now we're gonna let this guy be. We're gonna let it sit in that oil, and we're gonna let it develop a nice caramelization on the bottom. Maybe give it about 3.5, 4 minutes. So heat control is really important at this stage. Once the pan is really, really hot and you put that steak in there, the steak is gonna start to draw heat out of the pan. So you need to give it a little bit of time for that heat to come back up. But don't go ahead, don't mess with the stove settings. Keeping it around medium high. Everything will work out in the end. So I'm beginning to see a little bit of color begin to develop on this guy. Beauty. Got a little bit of caramelization down on the bottom here, but I think it can go another round on that side. All right, flip this guy over. Look at that great color on there. That's beautiful. So at this point, I want to begin to add my other components here. First things first, I'm going to grab my butter. I'm going to turn the heat down just a little bit because I don't want my butter to burn too quickly. About a tablespoon in there. And I'm going to grab my butter and my herbs, and I'm going to get them in there at the same time. This is where the spoon comes into play. I like to tilt my pan a little bit and pour that butter over there. Try to keep a little bit of that garlic in the pan. Let that guy cook up a little bit further. Starting to get a lot of nice aromas out of this now. We can now see the butter is beginning to brown up nicely for us. I can feel that it's a little bit tender against the spoon there. Keep pouring that fat over this guy. It's gonna be great. So one of the most important parts when cooking is patience. And that is a huge component when you're cooking steak. You want to be really patient with it, especially when it's done cooking and it looks really tempting to start chopping it up and start eating it. We want to let this guy rest for a little while. You've probably heard people say this before, but letting the steak rest is extremely important. You want to give it time to sort of do a little bit of carryover cooking. It's going to bleed a little bit less when I cut into it, and it's going to have a much more even cook to it. Oh yes, there we go. Look at that. Beautiful. So we got a nice medium rare in the center there. We got a nice crispy outside. This guy is all set and ready to go. So it doesn't take a whole lot to cook a really, really good steak. It's just a matter of buying a nice piece of meat initially and having the right equipment to fry it up with. The Finex pan is probably my absolute favorite because it comes so well seasoned out of the box. They're really nicely polished. Nothing really wants to stick to them, but if you've got a nicely seasoned carbon steel or cast iron pan at home, you can get really awesome results like this every time. Thanks a lot for watching. Till next time.